come from. 81 Compromise was at last arranged between John of Antioch and Cyril, the terms of which were that Cyril subscribed a creed writ 10 by John, and that John, on behalf of the Eastern bishops, subscribed the condemnation of Nestorius. This abandonment of Nestorius, simply because it seemed politic, was deemed a cruel treachery by some of the bishops, who, rather than approve of it, submitted to be banished. Nestorius himself, in 435, was by imperial command banished to the greater oasis in Upper Egypt, in which exile, after various sufferings, he died. By an imperial edict, his books were condemned to be burned, and all persons were forbidden to read them. Churches following his views broke away from the rest of the Christian Church in what has come to be known as the Nestorian Schism. Many of his supporters immigrated to Persia. Over the centuries only small groups in India have survived. That is all looking at the issue from the Western point of view. However, in actuality, Philip Jenkins in his The Lost History of Christianity, The 1,000-Year Golden Age of the Church in the Middle East, Africa and Asia, and How It Died, Harper, 2009, page 3 writes, for most of its history, Christianity was a tricontinental religion, with powerful representation in Europe, Africa, and Asia, and this was true into the 14th century. Christianity became predominantly European not because this continent had any obvious affinity for that faith, but by default. Europe was the continent where it was not destroyed. Jenkins then discusses Timothy, who became the Nestorian Patriarch, or Catholicos, of the Church of the East around 780 Ibid, p. 6. Timothy was arguably the most significant Christian spiritual leader of his day, much more influential than the Western Pope, in Rome, and on a par with the Orthodox Patriarch in Constantinople. Perhaps a quarter of the world's Christians looked to Timothy as both spiritual and political head. At least as much as the Western Pope, he could claim to head the success of the ancient Apostolic Church. 82. Development of the Christian doctrine. Clearly those who followed the tradition of Nestorius were not by any means a small, unimportant community, as it might appear looking at things from just the Western point of view. So exactly what was Nestorius's understanding? Philip Schaff gives us a useful first-hand report in his History of the Christian Church, Volume 3 Nicene and Post-Nicene Christianity, AD 311–600, which I accessed on December 3, 2014 at http://www.ccel.org ccel Schaff hcc3 e.she.exe html. There he quotes Nestorius, citing multiple sources. You ask, says he in his first sermon, whether Mary may be called Mother of God. Has God then a mother? If so, heathenism itself is excusable in assigning mothers to its gods. But then Paul is a liar, for he said of the deity of Christ that it was without father, without mother, and without descent. No, my dear sir, Mary did not bear God. The creature bore not the uncreated Creator, but the man who is the instrument of the Godhead. The Holy Ghost conceived not the Logos, but formed for him, out of the Virgin, a temple which he might inhabit. John e. 21. The incarnate God did not die, but quickened him in whom he was made flesh. This garment, which he used, I honor on account of the God which was covered therein and inseparable therefrom. I separate the natures, but I unite the worship. Consider what this must mean. He who was formed in the womb of Mary, was not himself God, but God assumed him asamzit, i.e. clothed himself with humanity, and on account of him who assumed, he who was assumed is also called God. Schaff gives the translation of John 2:21 from the New Revised Standard Version repeated here with context. Jesus answered and said unto them, Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. The Jews therefore said, 46 years was this temple in building, and wilt thou raise it up in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. John 2:19-21 New Revised Standard Version. Where did the concept come from? 83 Nestorius's understanding seems to be somewhat